Hey everyone. I hope you all enjoyed my last conversation with Amy Parekh and Robin Glass from Included Health on what it means to be a great clinician, non-clinician team in healthcare. If not, please go back and take a listen. You can find it on YouTube or Spotify. This episode, which I'm excited to be sharing, features my friend Erika Pabo. Erika is a physician, an executive leader, and an entrepreneur with deep experience building, operating, and transforming businesses across the healthcare ecosystem. She has seen and done it all, from building companies at the 0 to 1 stage to now serving as Chief Transformation Officer and Operations Leader for Humana's primary care organization, the largest senior-focused primary care business in the country. You may know it as Centerwell, Conviva, or Elite. Before that, Erika served as co-president at Author, a company she helped incubate and operate as a business segment within Humana, and where she still sits on the board. And before that, she served as medical director for population health and associate director for primary care at Brigham and Women's Hospital, where she still sees patients today. She received her MD and her MBA from Harvard and her bachelor's degree from Yale. Erika is, well, a force. She's sat on all sides of the table as chief medical officer, but also leading operations and transformation as a partner to a CMO. She's both an MD and an MBA, and she's learned how to understand her value, to show her value, and to bring all of herself to her role. In our conversation, she shares her inspiration to pursue a joint MD-MBA degree, what she sees as the special qualities and qualifications that clinicians bring to the business world, the need to broaden our view of what a clinician leader can be, and also a final reminder that though we're focused here on clinician executives, the healthcare ecosystem would not survive or thrive without the innumerable clinicians on the ground doing the hard work of caring for patients. Up next, Erika Pabo. Erika, thank you for joining me on this fun little endeavor that I have recently started. I'm so excited to have you join me in this conversation.
My pleasure. Just it's always fun to spend time with you. And I'm so excited about the mission you're supporting and helping other clinician executives.
Thanks. Thank you. So, yeah, as you know, I'm just like having so much fun shining a giant spotlight on great clinician leaders, clinician executives as examples of what can be done. So thrilled to have you join me and tell your story to everybody. And yeah, we'll have a fun conversation. So maybe you can just start by sharing the story, where you are now and how just the little bits and pieces of how you got to where you are today. I'm sure we'll dig in on more of the details as we have this conversation.
That sounds great. So I think quick version of how I got here. I was one of those folks who wanted to be a physician since I was yay high.
Mhm.
But I think I long had some idea that I wanted to find a way to help populations of people or groups of people, kind of even before I had a way to talk about that in any sort of meaningful way. I had a really unique opportunity to spend some time at a organization called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, working with Don Berwick, who was one of my early mentors. And that was one of the first times I really had my eyes open to the idea that healthcare was this complex system with intimate relationships with our public health system and all different sort of sectors of the world. But that if you wanted to make it better, there were actually ways to go about that in a sort of systematic way that could make things better. So I say that was a very transformative experience for me. Got some.
Wait, where in your journey did you get to work at IHI with Don Berwick? Was that med school, post-med school, residency? Where along the way?
Post-college. So
Post-college.
I
Okay.
had studied history of medicine as an undergrad, really as a way to do kind of public health policy at a liberal arts school. So got to do some like sociology and political science, did my pre-med recs along the way. And Don, in his sort of infinite wisdom, had created this role at IHI called the special assistant. It was probably the best job title I'll ever have. And his whole idea, I ended up being the second person in the role, was that he would hire someone who wanted to go to medical school but he would bring them into IHI for a year, both to contribute and to learn, and that they would then go off to medical school with this very different perspective on the healthcare system.
Brilliant.
And I saw some job posting at a job fair. I was actually about to take a different job at an awesome nonprofit called Health Leads, but I saw this job thing. I said, that looks amazing. So I put on this little jacket and ran over to the health fair, like just to meet with these folks at IHI. And my predecessor in this role, Alexi Nazem, who is off doing great things as a clinician entrepreneur.
Amazing. It was Alexi that was the first person in that role. How interesting.
And Alexi convinced me this was the job I needed to do. I think I was on a train to Boston like a week later to go interview with Don. The second I met him, I was totally sold.
Oh, amazing.
And that ended up being a really foundational experience for me. At the time, I was very interested in global health. IHI was just starting to expand their global health portfolio. So got to do a bunch of domestic work, a bunch of developing country work, and just learn from this incredible ecosystem of innovators inside of safety and quality in healthcare. Because for those that don't know, Don Berwick and Paul Batalden and a handful of others were really the sort of godfathers of bringing all this sort of evidence from engineering and other industries around quality improvement into healthcare. I think from there, I'm hoping we'll come back to this, but I wanted some different skill set to complement sort of being a clinically excellent physician.
Yeah.
Ultimately decided that going to business school was the right sort of path for me, which maybe we can come back to.
Sure.
But got to combine those in a variety, went business school alongside medical school, and then have had the opportunity to combine those sort of perspectives in a variety of roles since then. Most recently, I sit inside of a very large payer agnostic care delivery system caring for seniors in full risk called Centerwell, which is inside of the parent company Humana. Before that, I had come over to Humana to start and run a couple new companies, sort of as an entrepreneur inside the company. This most recent role has been a chance to continue to innovate, but to try and transform a company really that's already at enterprise scale, because we operate the largest senior-focused primary care company in the country, and then had some awesome opportunities before that to work full-time at the Brigham at an academic medical center that was on its own journey towards value-based care. Although it can also come back to sort of where it was in its journey and what made me sort of decide I wanted to explore a full risk environment.
Yeah, amazing. It's so interesting, right? First of all, to get the exposure to IHI and Don Berwick that early it is special. You know, we know many people have kind of crossed paths with him over the years, and of course, he's a special individual that has shaped the thinking of a lot of us around population health and quality improvement, of course. So that's amazing. And then I guess I'm thinking that must have been influential in your thinking about picking up, as you said, a different set of skills to complement being a great clinician, right? And so I mean, I guess tell me more about that stage, right, of your career. And the decision to do an MD MBA, which like in my era didn't exist at Harvard. It's sort of funny to think back. I think the program is celebrating its 20th year, which is crazy. And it's crazy to think that I preceded that by a lot.
Totally wild. I think I was in the second formal class. I guess I'm being the second. So I was just back at HBS to celebrate the 20th reunion, which was just amazing, and got to meet some colleagues on a couple of panels. It was just really fun to bring that group together. And it was novel at the time, and fortunately now I think is becoming more commonplace.
Right.
But another important mentor of mine sort of early on was someone named Dr. Howie Foreman at Yale. So I was at Yale as an undergrad, and Howie is just, to anyone who knows him, another amazing human and just transformational mentor to so many of us. But he led the MD MBA program at Yale when I was an undergrad. I got to meet him, but he also taught some undergrad classes. I took one of his undergrad classes, became a TA for him, and just got to learn alongside him. And so he sort of put the idea in my head that getting an MBA was a really different way of looking at the healthcare system. And then when I got to HMS, another sort of fabulous mentor, Barbara McNeil, I sort of sat down with her in her office, and I was thinking about, should I apply to public health school? Should I try and get a degree at the Kennedy School in public policy?
Mm-hmm.
Or should I go to business school? And after listening to me and kind of hearing what I was interested in and what I enjoyed doing, she sort of said, I think you want to be a change agent. If you want to be a
Mm-hmm.
change agent, go to business school. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means.
Right. Sounds nice. I like that term.
Sounds nice. You seem like you know what you're doing. And I'm so grateful I took her advice. I think the other thing for me is it was the most different skill set.
Mm,
I think there's a lot of philosophic overlap between public health school and medical school. And so I felt like I was going to get grounding in that if I tried.
yeah.
But just getting grounded in finances and operations and organizational structure and all that sort of stuff was new
Right.
to me. And I will say, I think I was one of the nerdiest people at business school who actually felt like I got a ton out of it.
Yeah.
I had tons of
In terms
classes.
of knowledge, I think a lot of people
Yeah.
think of business school as networking and building your community of people that you're going to be with, and doing great work with over the coming years.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
less about like the actual the actual content and classroom learning, but
They're each
sounds
of
like you soaked it all in.
Yeah, they're each of value in their own right. But like
Yes.
unlike folks who had been working in consulting for 5 years or who had worked in private equity or kind of you name it, I came in, I didn't know how to build an Excel model. I didn't, I could do some like the most basic things in Excel, but just
Right.
there was a foundational skill set that I leverage every day now.
Yeah.
That I learned, it was a language, tool set, a different lens or way of looking at things.
Mhm.
That I continue to leverage sort of daily now. And so getting to do that sort of alongside medical school was really
Yeah.
valuable to me.
I
Not that
think
you
we'll
can't learn that
probably have
anyway.
people listening to this conversation who are at two different stages of their careers, right? So there's the group of folks who are early, like you were when you were getting your MD, thinking about like which other school might I want to also learn from. And then there's going to be a cohort of people, no doubt, that are later stage, right? Maybe they're already practicing physicians or clinicians and thinking about entering the entrepreneurial or executive world, I'll say. I'll use that term broadly, right? So question came up for me early days, right? Do I go get some additional training? Having not done an MBA, being totally green to the business world, I felt like I got my training on the job, and I had fabulous mentors, thank goodness, who took me on as a project and kind of said, oh, you got to learn about finance and we're going to talk about project management. And cheered when I fired my first person just because it was another skill I had learned, though I was in tears. So I guess like maybe like curious to get your advice for this sort of two cohorts of people, like the early, is it worth going? Because this question comes up all the time, right? Like, should I go get an MBA? And it comes from these two different categories. And so curious to get your perspective on, whether you'd recommend it or, what are the ways you think about the pros and cons of getting an MBA to be in the business world?
Yeah, I think I am grateful I did it every day.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess but I totally agree. There are other paths to get the same expertise.
Yeah.
So
Fair.
I certainly don't think it is necessary to develop the kind of understanding, sort of skill set that you might want to bring to driving change, regardless of what role you're going to sit in the healthcare ecosystem. But for me, it was a relatively efficient way to start a foundation.
Mhm.
But just like with medical school, you graduate med school knowing just enough to be sort of
Yeah.
dangerous. If you don't have the right
Yes.
formal training and
And then you
support.
keep learning and growing as you
Yeah. And you keep
practice.
learning.
Yeah.
And that's why resident internship and
Right.
residency exist. And I felt the same way when I finished business school. It was a really interesting foundation in areas I didn't have a foundation that I could then build on.
Yeah.
But I think you can start that anywhere. So I would do it again in a heartbeat. But if I were at a later stage in my own career and had other alternatives of where to build that, I'd probably think about the trade
Exactly.
very differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was in that circumstance, not having the opportunity to do it. It's just the programs didn't exist, but I
Yeah.
wasn't even in a frame of mind to do it. So it would not have crossed my mind to do it back then. But yeah, I had the opportunity to kind of learn those things and to know what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, and where I could support my blind spots with like amazing people who were great at project management or great at X, Y, or Z, around me.
And you brought a richness and depth of knowledge in other areas in care delivery by the time
Right.
you were developing this foundation
Yes.
in other areas. So there's
Correct.
tremendous benefits to doing it in a different way at a different stage. I don't think one's better than the other. I
Yeah.
think as long as we're thoughtful about and can introspect enough to know sort of where am I in my own development journey? What do I know? What do I not know? Where do I need to develop? And
Exactly.
there's different ways in academic classrooms or in the real world to
I
get those.
think you're spot on. It's a little bit of that, or a lot of bit of that self-awareness to understand like where you're at and what you bring and where your holes are and how you can fill them in the right ways. So I love that. Yeah. It's funny. I was chatting with a doc earlier, and a lot of the framing I have come to, I recognize my own maybe miss steps in sort of thinking. A lot of focus on what deficits clinicians bring when they enter a business environment. And he was like, I've started to flip that script and thinking about what special qualities, not deficits, clinician leaders bring to this world. This is literally a conversation this morning that I was like, I would love to chat with Erika about this, because I think, yeah, we often come at these like, oh, docs have these big gaps we need to address, but like, there's also something unique and special about us. So curious what your thoughts are there.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's an interesting orientation in general that we over-orient on our deficits, don't necessarily lean into our strengths. I think that's true of all leaders, not just sort of clinician executives. But I think it's totally right. I think clinicians bring unique expertise in what's actually happening at the front lines of care delivery.
Yeah.
That is the heart and soul, I believe, of our healthcare ecosystem.
Yep.
And that expertise is irreplaceable and unique. I also think, regardless of sort of what specialty you're practicing or what area of healthcare you're working in, there is a moral compass and North Star of what is in the interest of patients that clinicians bring that is invaluable regardless of what seat they're sitting in.
Yeah.
I also think there is something about the process of clinical training that one of the most important things you have to know and be great at is knowing when you don't know something.
Yes.
Because in the care of a patient, if you pretend to know something you don't, you kill people. I mean, that is sort of life and death, not to put too fine a point on it. And bringing that humility, self-knowledge to the sort of business world, I find tremendously valuable. Maybe my errors won't be as grave if I pretend to understand something that the product leader on my team is telling me, but I don't really.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make errors sort of down the road, as opposed to stopping and saying, hey, here's what I think you said. I understood this part. I didn't understand this part. But I think clinicians inherently know that in their clinical life. And the more they bring that to the business world, I think the faster you learn, the better you sort of ultimately are. So I think it's a really good point.
Yes.
I have a bias that I think the most transformational leaders in healthcare are clinician executives. Not that operational executives who aren't clinicians can't be wonderful and fantastic leaders, but there is a secret sauce, a sort of unique expertise that clinician executives bring that you can't get elsewhere.
I think so too. Yes, I think so too. And I agree with that. And at the same time, I have been coming from this framing of like filling gaps and training or developing the current and the next wave of clinician leaders. But at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge, and maybe that's why I'm so interested in this, because I do think I agree with you completely that there is something special. And the companies that I have been watching, the people that I have been watching with the greatest successes, are either led by or there is a strong clinician leader in the mix. And then we've seen the other case examples, which are not uncommon, right? Where people go raging forward in healthcare without that moral compass, and it's problematic sometimes. So yeah, there's something special here, and I think we need more of us in doing these great roles to really push innovation forward. I think it's good for clinical care, and people have heard me say this, but it's clinical and business. I think clinical outcomes and business growth will be better with great clinician leaders.
Yeah, both are better. Both are better. And I think you can achieve that through an operational and clinical leadership dyad. There's lots of ways to get there, but I think you need both, and they drive better patient outcomes, better population health outcomes, lower costs, and healthier bottom line, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit business. Yeah, no question.
Yeah. Let's get into that. I have a bunch of questions. We'll bounce around because I love just taking little snippets of what we're saying and kind of going in on it. So this point about the dyad, I think is really interesting, like how to meet with success, especially when you're a clinician leader working with your non-clinician peers. And the last conversation I recorded was with a really strong dyad, which was Amy Parekh and Robin Glass from Included. I wanted to say Grand Rounds, but Included Health. And yeah, the whole point of that conversation was to sort of highlight the strengths of working together across disciplines. Yeah, curious to hear your thoughts. Like what's worked well? What are some of the challenges you've faced? And we can dig in further from there.
Couple things that I have found really helpful. And interestingly, I have actually sat on both sides of that dyad. It's certainly been the clinician leader partner to operators, but actually over the last couple of years, I actually sit on the operational side of that dyad, and I bring a different sort of hat to it. But I have leaned into sort of honing my sort of operational skills, always with that sort of clinical expertise.
Good point, because your role right now is Chief Operating Officer.
So I lead operations and transformation for our primary care business, and then I work incredibly closely with our Chief Medical Officer, including.
Very cool. All right, so we're going to hear like both sides of the story from you. I love it.
Which has been really fun. I think one is just both approaching it from a point of curiosity and mutual respect. I think regardless of what role you are on the team, almost everything in healthcare, almost in every business industry is a team sport. And no one player on any team has all of the right skills and expertise for that team to be successful. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a team.
Exactly.
That's almost never the case, certainly in complex organizations. So I think it's having respect, understanding, having knowledge of what you bring to the table, respecting your own sort of capabilities and skill set, and then knowing what your partners, whether in operations or product and technology or finance, are bringing to the table. So I think that's one. It's just that curiosity and respect. I think second is developing enough of a shared language that you can have meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
So over the years, I have invested a lot in trying to understand enough about finance, or enough about product development roadmaps, or enough about technology development that I can have meaningful sort of conversations with my peers and partners that I'm working with. And I think they have to do the same.
Yes.
They need to understand enough of the frontline healthcare experience, what matters for clinical quality, what operational excellence in care delivery or whatever ecosystem you're in sort of looks like. But I think having that shared language is really important. Otherwise, you end up talking past each other and not realizing it.
Yeah. I wrote a blog article on this, or an essay called Docsplaining. And it kind of goes both ways. Like you could see it from the doc or the physician's perspective and from the non-physician's perspective, right? Like this whole, we're like, we expect the other person to understand what we're saying. We don't find that shared language. And then I have this exact sentiment of like, we end up talking over one another, but yes, even when our intentions are good and we maybe share a common goal. So I think that point about finding shared vocabulary, language, understanding is so critical. I couldn't agree more.
And you're never going to be as expert as they are. Like I remember when I was working in an early stage technology company, And I just felt like I needed to learn how to code. I was never going to be a coder.
Yeah.
I was never going to be the role I was on a team, but it was so helpful just to invest like a little bit of time and energy in trying to understand that, learn the vocabulary so that I could then have a more meaningful conversation and understand why something took the length it did, or why something was getting t-shirt size to
Yeah, exactly.
amount of like development time. Like that was just incredibly helpful. And I was able to contribute to conversations in a much more meaningful way. And then vice versa. And I think when you have the benefit of being a clinician, being able to bring folks into that clinical experience who are operators, I think is
Yeah.
really valuable. So I actually still see patients. I was actually seeing patients this morning.
Amazing.
And I try to make a point to sort of bring stories from my clinical experience to my team, because 90% of my team are non-clinician,
Right.
sort of operational executives at this point. I do have a couple clinical leaders on my team, but most of them never get that sort of experience. Their only experience is as a
Yeah.
patient. And so helping to bring them into that sort of journey and experience helps them interact differently with the business and with clinical colleagues.
Yeah. So you had a couple. Curiosity and mutual respect was your number one. Number two was shared language. What else? Anything else that you would say are sort of key elements to make that sort of dyad or triad or clinician and non-clinician relationship successful?
I guess the other two pieces that were maybe implied in there is just everyone coming to it with growth and learning mindset. It sort of ties back to that curiosity,
Mhm.
but continually trying to learn and understand sort of your partners. Um, and then I think clarity of roles and responsibilities, especially as your organization gets bigger and more complicated. It can feel a little over-engineered in the beginning to write out sort of a RACI diagram in a dyad partnership, or in some more complex program or project. But like we're embarking on a EMR implementation, and being crystal clear on what roles are clinicians going to play in that, because ultimately they're a critical end user,
Yeah.
other than patients, the most important end user, with operators, with others on our technology team. So I think being really clear on RACIs, and then I think investing in sufficient training and supports for everyone on the leadership
Mhm.
team, regardless of whether that's sort of clinicians or sort of operational executives, so that they can be successful in that sort of roles and responsibilities of that organization.
Yeah. Yeah. That communication early on, when lacking, I have found to be deeply problematic and set up for mess and misunderstanding. But and even when you lay out roles and responsibilities, it's just a starter. And sometimes there's futzing and work that has to go on, right, to continue to hone. But it's a fabulous
Really,
start.
often like
You just got to
and
start.
often it's an everyday sort of, if not hour by hour, sort of,
Yeah.
especially early in a relationship.
Yeah.
Um, I I love to read sort of team theory. And there's a lot of evidence that teams have to work together actually for multiple years before they start to become maximally effective.
Years.
Years. I think the asymptote, it starts to flatten around 3 years.
Wow.
And so there's some
That is a really good reminder, because I think people pop in and expect things to be fluid and functional relatively quickly. And that's a really good reminder that relationships take time to really flesh out.
And there's things you can do, structures like being
Mhm.
clear on roles and responsibilities on a given team or in a project that I think can help speed that. But I think the airline industry actually offers some of the most fascinating evidence of the percentage of
Mhm.
accidents that happen the first time a crew is working together.
Huh.
Extraordinarily high, and actually extraordinary proportion of them are actually the first flight they take together.
No kidding. That's
But,
fascinating.
but you
But
can
it just
really
makes you think,
accelerate
like in healthcare, how often
that.
our teams change so frequently, right? And just some curious, that statistic is so interesting in the context of like residency and how often you're actually working closely with different people day to day.
Yeah, but I think that's where you think about like code examples are one of the ones I think like having clarity of roles and
Yep. Right.
responsibilities in a code team allows a new team to walk into a room and have a much better chance of working together successfully and
Sure.
seamlessly with that sort of clarity.
Yeah, maybe
But
different people, but clarity of roles. And
yeah,
so like the unit knows how the unit works together, even if the humans filling each spot on the team might be different
yeah,
humans.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So interesting. So give me an example. We've talked about like good positive qualities, but like give me, if you can, share a story of something that's been challenging where, either in I'm the clinician CMO working with a non-clinician peer, or in your flip, I'm the chief operating officer and leading transformation. When things have been sticky or not worked well, and how have you managed that?
I,
You're like, I don't know if I want to share that.
there's challenges
I'm
every
like looking
day.
at your face. You're like, which story is safe to
So
share?
honest. So I think it's a great question. I think there's challenges every day in any sort of working relationship or organization, and that's part of the fun of it is working
Yeah.
through those. But I will say I've had a number of points in my career when I've come into an organization, particularly early in my career, as the clinical leader.
Yeah.
Was the CMO for this company, or I was the chief health officer for the company, or I was the clinical leader. And that role of CMO or chief health officer, I think is one of the most heterogeneous roles in an organization.
Absolutely.
And it can mean everything and it can mean nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I would, and maybe that's okay if there's clarity of roles and responsibilities and people know what they're getting into and what they want and need from each other. But I think that's an area just of tremendously wide range in the industry. I have come into places where the previous view of a clinical leader was relatively limited. It
Yes.
was the idea that you were an advisor who came in and offered perspective on very discrete topics
Yeah.
in a relatively surface level, and or you were supposed to be sort of more of a spokesperson,
Yes.
sort of sales agent who could speak clinician to clinician. I have really struggled with those sort of views of clinical leaders,
Yep.
partly because it's not how I want to
Not the
be.
one you want to be. It's not the
Not
description
the,
of
it's
what
not
you
the
were
one I
intending.
want to be.
Yeah.
And I think it really under leverages the
Yeah.
value that a clinician executive can bring to the table. So I think when I have found myself in those situations, those can be really challenging. And I have chosen at times to over-index on becoming an excellent operator,
Yeah.
where you don't even, half the time people don't even know I'm a doc. But becoming an excellent operator so that I can be respected and valued for my contribution, sort of regardless of the room I'm in or the perspective that someone has on a clinician. And now I'm at a point in my career where I get to bring those back together,
Mm-hmm.
where both sort of very proudly that I am an excellent operator and sort of transformational leader
Yeah.
and
It's great.
side, but also have a unique perspective that I think adds value. But I think when that role is undervalued, it does a disservice to everyone in the room.
Yeah. It's partly why I'm doing this whole endeavor, because I think that is still probably too commonly the perspective. And maybe yeah, I think that's sort of why I want to highlight people like you and others, because I do think there are great clinician leaders who really can be business and are, not can be, but are fabulous business leaders first and foremost, right? So I used to say I want to fashion myself as a healthcare executive with clinical expertise versus a clinical subject matter expert. And that framing was just how I thought I was trying to frame myself, which made me want to learn about product and tech and data, and et cetera, right? But I do think hiring teams who haven't had the experience of working with you or me or people like us are still locked into this old view of CMO as clinical advisor. And so, part of this endeavor is to really peel back that onion and say, there are other ways you should be thinking about deploying people like us in service
Yeah,
of
no, and it will reap
growth.
rewards for the ecosystem. So
100%.
I'm so excited that you have taken that on.
100%. So did you end up in roles like your early roles you were referencing, chief health officer, chief medical officer, whatever it might have been, where you walked in and that was the perspective that people had or expectations people had of you in the role? And you had to break down those misperceptions about what you were capable of?
Yeah, yes. And I've had the fortune to work with people who were open to those perceptions being
Yeah.
changed and allowed me to grow and flex and wanted to partner and wanted to see it
Yeah.
differently. But yes, I've absolutely stepped in when predecessors of mine had played that role, happily so. And so that was sort of the expectation that
Yeah.
they had. And often you don't fix it overnight,
Mhm.
but I think it's finding a problem outside of that realm that's a more sort of operational problem. At least this is how it worked for me. Finding something more operational and showing I could bring value
Yeah.
and actually additive value because I also sort of had the clinical perspective and
Yeah.
sort of doing that once, doing that twice, doing that 50 times, and then at the end, you're seen very differently.
Yeah.
Um, and organizations will then structure themselves very differently because they allow
Yes.
you to take on a much broader sort of operational role over
Yeah.
time.
And to be fair to like the folks that hired me at Able to, yeah, I think Michael didn't know, and I didn't know what I was capable of back then, right? I didn't have an MBA. I had such little exposure to business, I mean, I think he probably saw me as in that role you just described, like as a, gravitas, lending gravitas in the sales front. And I mean, I'm a
Yep.
great cheerleader, and that was a role I played, and happily so. But I think as we dug in, it became clear that I was capable of more. And so it's nice to have people around you who are willing to change and willing to open their eyes to possibility. I had that, I think I would have been frustrated if not for having a wonderful partner in our founder and CEO who kind of saw promise, and was willing to shape it, help me shape it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I will say, as I have gone in my career, that sort of partnership or who I work with, it used to be relatively low on my like checklist of what I was looking for. And
Yeah.
every year it gets higher and higher until it's sort of right at the top. But I think having willing and open partners who have that same sort of curiosity and growth mindset goes a long way.
Yeah.
Not just for your partnership, but also just it speaks volumes about the kind of leader they're going to be in general.
100%. So maybe just to stay on this vein a little bit, because I'm guessing there are people who pop into CMO roles and there hasn't been great role clarity in the hiring. There hasn't been great introspection maybe on like what skill sets you may or may not be bringing to the table as a clinician leader. Like, what was an example? You said you had to kind of show what you were capable of when maybe you were misjudged early on without bad intentions, but
Yeah.
like what was an early example of something you did to kind of go, hey guys, like there's more here that I can bring to the table than you might be appreciating. Because I'm guessing there's going to be others out there who are like in that frustrating spot where they're thinking, I can do more, but they're not, appreciating it. And I think some people just maybe misperceive it as disrespect, which is then I think we get kind of entrenched in our fighting mode versus the let me show you mode, which is so invaluable.
Yeah, I think couple examples, one relatively early in my career and then one more recent
Okay.
that was a meaningful unlock, I think, for me.
Mm,
I think the one early on, I had the opportunity, this was actually as I was finishing residency to apply for a grant for a community health worker pilot.
okay.
So we hypothesis, this fortunately community health workers in developing country world and a couple spaces have been critical parts of healthcare systems for a long, long time, but really wasn't until the last sort of 10 and 15 years domestically that I feel like people have given them more credence. So this sort of predated that. So there weren't that many domestic community health worker models at the time. Applied for a grant. And I think initially people thought I was just going to be the idea person and then was going to need sort of a partner to help implement it.
Mhm.
And it was a relatively modest sort of project, but I was able to put together the strategy, write the grant, get the grant, and implement it And then I could do enough sort of back of the envelope sort of modeling to show the return on investment that we had gotten from it.
Mm.
And I think it was just one project, but I felt like showing people I could do something end to end and could speak to the value of that project, not just the clinical value, but to show I could implement it and sort of bring it to life.
Yeah.
And could evaluate it in a language that spoke to the folks at our healthcare system at the time who were going to help me make a decision about whether, or they were going to make a decision about whether they invest more in this program and I could scale it or not.
Yeah.
So I think finding an opportunity where you can kind of own something end to end, not just the clinical piece, but the operations. Not that you can't get help on those things, but if you can sort of pull that together and know how to tell that story. I think a more recent, so that and I
Yeah,
think
it's a great example.
people saw me very differently
Right.
within that healthcare system after that, and then trusted me to put together much more sort of expansive proposals. And ultimately that led to a full-time job there, leading population health for that system. I think a more recent example, when I came over to the payer side, it was to help start a startup,
Mhm.
the insurance business. And I was initially hired as the chief health officer. And we spent the first 6 months doing a ton of consumer research, trying to
Mhm.
understand what our customer wanted and needed, what was being met in the current healthcare system and insurance system, and what wasn't. And we had a bunch of sort of aha moments around, our customers not differentiating their health needs from their non-health needs, sort of their administrative needs. Yet insurance companies and care delivery companies often segment like what goes to the front desk versus what goes to a nurse versus what gets you to a doctor. Inside a health insurance company, that actually, even those administrative things might get siloed out to 18 different call centers
Yeah.
with particular expertise. But I sort of had this aha of, if we really want to transform the experience for the customer, we need an integrated way to serve them across clinical and non-clinical needs. And so I asked to take on our administrative call center function. So in my health officer role, it was an operationally oriented chief health officer role. So I was going to oversee all of the kind of traditional care management services.
Right.
We were going to also have community health workers and social workers as part of that care management team. And I was going to oversee our utilization management function, because those are kind of traditional, more clinical pieces of a insurance company. But I asked for responsibility for that, for those call center. We call them care coordinators because we thought about them really. And I learned a ton, but could also show I had perspective that was valuable in this totally different space. I got to work with a ton of folks who were experts in contact centers and telephony systems and customer service, because I had a ton to learn, but I took the time to learn it, got to work with some just excellent experts inside of the company who knew that, and could bring that together in a unique way with the sort of clinical functions. And then I ultimately became co-president of that business unit. So ultimately got out of that sort of chief health officer role. But I think, again, it was sort of finding some project to change people's perspective on who I was as a leader and what I could operate. And then they gave me a lot of permission space to add on to that over time.
Such great lessons, right? I do think the flip sometimes happens, right? That people are like stuck in the title and the perceptions of the title and role, versus sort of saying the title is meaningless. It's just a bunch of words that say you're important, you have a degree that is medical, use the word heterogeneous, like it could mean anything, right? And then it is on us a little bit, right, as individuals, if our peers don't quite get us, to show and not expect that they know how to put us to best use. Like if I know my value, okay, let me help you see my value. And, if then my value is not of use here, that's a different question. But if it's not being put to use properly, I think it's on us to help our peers kind of understand and not fall back on the I'm being disrespected, they don't understand what I can do storyline, which I hear.
Totally. I think that's so right. I mean, it's recognize what you bring to the table, what you know and what you don't know, and then put it to use.
Right.
Right, and
Right.
to your point, if you're not allowed to put it to use,
Different problem. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
But
that's not.
mostly people will welcome like your contribution, and I think we're afraid to like step out of our comfort zone sometimes. I don't want to generalize too much, but that happens, because it is sometimes stuff we don't know. But
Yeah,
yeah, I loved, for example, later days at Able to, I ran all of healthcare economics and had the actuaries under me, and
uh,
I ran data science and had, and it was so fun to bring. I mean, obviously, I can't do the specifics that they do technically, but like I think that they really appreciate having this sort of clinical perspective. That, to the earlier part of the conversation, like I had enough of a shared language and understanding of what they did and how they functioned, right, to be able to bring my expertise to theirs. And I would ask questions and poke and prod, and I think they appreciated that, which was
totally.
really special.
Totally. I think that can be so special. And I feel the same way. Like when I've had the chance to oversee marketing or product, technology, back office operations,
Right.
revenue cycle, kind of you name it.
Totally.
I will never be those
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah.
I don't have the depth of expertise that they do. But I think that partnership can be a beautiful thing. And I think they learn a ton.
Absolutely.
Myself as a clinical leader and vice versa. It's just fun and intellectually
Yeah.
stimulating.
Yeah.
Think about those challenges every day.
Yeah. I mean, there was a period where I had such ferocious curiosity. I think what happened to me before I moved from academic doc to entrepreneurship, the learning curve started to become asymptotic for me. And it wasn't flat, but it was starting to flatten. And then I got into this world and I'm like, oh, like EOB, like explanation of benefits. I don't know what that is. Like, how do we calculate ROI in this world? Tell me about COGS. So like, it just felt like I had so much to learn. And by asking questions, I think that was where I was able to show places where I could contribute because we think differently,
Yeah.
to your earlier points. So in the
No,
last couple of minutes we have, there's so much we could do like a part 2 and a 3 and a 4, and we still wouldn't cover all the topics.
I agree.
I obviously you have a big job today, and you've had a couple of big jobs in your lifetime so far, and you're still young. You also have a life and a family, and I know we talk about balance, which I think is a foolish word, but I like to think about like your whole self and your whole life, right? Like I never felt like I had work and life. I just had me. Um, and so tell me about life to the extent that you can share, like what life is like and how you have your whole life. How do you navigate? Because I'm sure there are people who are wondering how to
I
handle
think,
it all.
I think it's a great question, and the answer looks different for everyone
Yeah.
and looks different for everyone at different chapters. So I think about it as this sort of complex dance.
Hmm.
And you can't be excellent and investing your time in everything in each chapter.
Yes.
Um, no one else can prioritize for you, and no one else can set limits for you.
Yeah.
So I think depending on what chapter you're in, sort of being clear with yourself and your partner and your family, sort of what your priorities are. I am very fortunate to have a wonderful spouse and partner who also has a big job and career. We have 3 children. And it's funny, I was someone I didn't know if I wanted to be a parent until I had kids of my own. And
Hmm.
it's the biggest joy of my life is getting to be a mom and a parent to them. But I love what I do.
Yeah.
Being, um, making contributions to make our crazy healthcare system work better for people who need it, who are underserved by it today, is incredibly important to me. So for me, though my family and career are the 2 things sort of I
Yeah.
prioritize. And I'm very fortunate to be able to afford a lot of help and support to outsource a lot of the rest. So for me, spending time with my kids when I'm not at work is what's important to me. Bringing them to school in the morning is my favorite part of the day.
Yeah.
And so I try and create some time in my calendar to do that on days that I can. And again, feel very fortunate to be able to outsource a lot of the rest of it. they don't care who cooked them dinner. It's not me, not my spouse either. They don't care who did the laundry. So being able to outsource all of those things, so that when I'm at work, I can be 110% focused there on what needs to happen. And same thing when I'm with my family, sort of focus the other way. But those don't happen cleanly in certain hours of the day. They're interspersed. And I love talking about that with my kids. Like they know what I do and why it matters to me. And I think they're proud of me. I think I'm also able to be the mom they need me to be. So those are if I can be the leader that folks on my team need me to be, and the mom that my kids need me to be, like that's a win for me right now. And
Yeah, I love
not
it.
in the shape of my life. And, my partner and I, as much like us time as I'd love. And, in other chapters, I'd love to get back
Totally.
to like qualify for the Boston Marathon, but that's not gonna be anytime soon.
Totally. I know. I mean, you just figure it out. Yeah, I like you didn't use the word presence, but that's the sentiment I'm hearing, which is, when you're at work, you're 110%, you're there, you're present. And when you're home, you're present, right? It was a lesson I had to learn because early days did try to have too many drawers open at once with risk of the dresser drawer tipping over. And I had to learn that lesson to, okay, I got to close a drawer before I can open another one. And sometimes they're both slightly open or hasn't closed fully, but like, yeah, so it is messy sometimes at the edges, but being fully present in one was key. And not in all things. It's not possible. I should be fully present in all things.
Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah, and I think that's a great criticism because I didn't say it specifically, but it has been critical to me that it's not that, school can't reach me if there's an emergency, but I'm not thinking about that when I'm at work. I am present.
Yeah.
And same thing, when we're having family dinner, it's not that someone can't call me if there's an emergency and I'll answer at work. But you're doing both things terribly if for me at least.
Yes, that's how I felt too. Yeah. And I felt guilty, it's all bad.
And it's not satisfying. I love what I do. I love being in it. I also love being with my family. So I agree. I think presence and focus and boundaries, and setting them for yourself and prioritizing for yourself. Because again, there is no right balance or right sort of dance, except what's right for you and your sort of career and your family.
100%. So in our final minute or two, any closing thoughts or anything I didn't ask you that you think would be important to share?
No, I've loved the conversation. I think one thing I will just say, because I think there's a lot of talk around clinician executives and the role they can play in healthcare transformation, which I think is pivotal and is where I have dedicated my career, and I know you have as well. But I think sometimes we don't speak as much about the value of clinicians. Excellent frontline clinicians are the hearts and minds of our care delivery ecosystem, and valuing the role they play for what it is, I think is something I want to make sure we don't forget in all our conversations about being a clinician.
Yes.
And then in folks who have taken on roles as clinician executives, I find it really grounding to remind myself of who I'm serving. Because if I haven't delivered an excellent patient experience for our patients, and if I haven't helped deliver an excellent provider experience for our clinicians, I have failed. We have failed. And so I think keeping that sort of front line at the heart of what you do is really important, regardless of what role you sit in.
It's such a good reminder. Yes, being an executive is not at the expense of the rest of the clinician population who, frankly, we need every last one of those folks to be doing the hard work they're doing. That I did. You're still doing. I don't see patients anymore, but I did for many years, and it's all important. They're just different roles.
Yeah, and great executives, I believe, see themselves as servant leaders, sort of elevating the job doability, the joy in work, and sort of the outcomes for those sort of frontline teams.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining this. Sharing your wisdom, your thoughtfulness. It's just a joy to chat with you. And I am certain people will learn from your experience and hopefully it'll help them guide their own paths in their careers. So thank you.
That's a pleasure to join you. I'm so excited that you have taken on sort of supporting this unique piece of the ecosystem, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks.